The United States is facing a new economic pressure point, and it is coming from a place that once seemed distant and quiet. Activity in the Arctic is rising fast, and it is already shaping the cost of energy, the stability of supply chains, and the financial pressure on the federal budget. For years, the region was treated as a remote stretch of ice, but it has now become a strategic arena that influences how much Americans pay to heat their homes, how companies move goods, and how the government prepares for emerging security challenges. The shift began when Arctic temperatures increased at a pace far above the global average. Melting ice opened limited seasonal routes, exposed new areas rich in natural resources, and forced several countries to strengthen their presence in the region. As a result, the United States now allocates more funding for advanced equipment and operations in environments where conditions are harsher and more expensive than almost anywhere else. A short example shows how this translates to daily life. When the government increases investment in Arctic operations, even slightly, the ripple spreads through the budget and can raise long-term financial pressure that influences taxes, public spending choices, and borrowing needs. At the same time, American companies face new uncertainty. Changes in Arctic shipping potential affect how goods might move between continents in the future. Energy firms watch the region closely because fluctuations in Arctic activity can influence global fuel prices, which eventually shape electricity and heating costs for households across the country. This is why the Arctic is no longer an environmental headline. It has become a real force in the cost structure of the U.S. economy. The question now is simple. Why has the Arctic turned into a place where global powers are competing for influence? The first answer is the rise in military tension, because this region has become one of the most sensitive points in the Northern Hemisphere, and activity across the high north can shift the balance of power faster than almost anywhere else. For the United States, both the waters above Alaska and the broader Arctic zone that stretches toward Greenland form a connected line of early warning and long-range monitoring. Any change in this zone demands more investment, more equipment, and more specialized operations that must function reliably in extreme conditions. This shift has pushed the federal budget in a new direction. Cold environments require gear that can survive very low temperatures, and those tools are far more expensive than standard equipment used elsewhere. Maintenance cycles are shorter as well, since machinery exposed to freezing weather wears down faster and must be inspected more often. Training adds another layer of cost, because units must operate in remote places where supply chains are harder to maintain and support. A simple example shows how fast these expenses build. When a single deployment forces aircraft to burn additional fuel in freezing conditions, the cost of that mission rises, and that increase compounds each year as similar operations continue. The same economic pressure appears in the northeastern part of this Arctic zone, where the United States maintains long-standing facilities that support monitoring across the region. These sites require steady spending on transportation, energy, and personnel, and the environment makes every routine task more expensive. Even moving supplies or rotating staff can strain the budget when the cost of each mile and each hour increases in cold and remote areas. All of these factors flow back into the national budget and create long-term commitments that influence how resources are allocated. They show how the economic impact begins even before broader strategic goals are considered. But this military dimension is only one part of the larger picture, since the Arctic power race is driven by forces that reach well beyond military strategy. The next force is economic, and it begins with the opening of new routes created by the rapid change in Arctic ice. As summer temperatures rise and sea ice retreats, a limited window opens along the northern coast of Russia. This passage is known as the Northern Sea Route, and even though it is far from a stable shipping corridor, the possibility of regular use has already changed how countries plan for future trade. For China and Russia, the idea is simple. If the route becomes usable during warmer months, they can move goods between Asia and Europe without relying on traditional paths. This gives them a potential advantage, since shorter distances mean lower fuel consumption and less time at sea. A quick comparison shows the scale. Ships traveling through the Northern Sea Route can cut thousands of miles compared to the Suez Canal, and even a small reduction in travel time translates into meaningful savings for any large shipping operator. For the United States, the picture looks different. American companies still depend heavily on the Suez Canal and Pacific shipping lanes, both of which remain vulnerable to global disruptions. If China and Russia build a pattern of cooperation using the Arctic during certain months, the United States could face a shift in competitive pressure, since logistics costs shape everything from import prices to the final cost of goods on store shelves. These changes do not happen overnight. However, even the possibility of an alternative route influences long-term planning for shipping companies, energy firms, and manufacturers. If the competitive landscape shifts toward a China-Russia partnership in the high north, U.S. firms may face higher costs simply because they have fewer alternatives when disruptions occur. The impact eventually reaches American households. Higher logistics costs can increase the price of imported goods, and those changes can feed into broader inflation pressure over time. This is why the route competition in the Arctic has gained so much attention. But the real core of the Arctic power race is not the routes themselves. It is the resources hidden beneath the ice. The resources hidden beneath the ice are now shaping the future of U.S. supply chains in ways that matter far beyond the Arctic. Large areas of the region contain untapped reserves of natural gas, oil, and rare earth minerals, and these materials support many of the industries that drive the U.S. economy. As more research is completed, estimates show that a significant portion of the world's undiscovered energy and mineral reserves may lie in this zone, which is why the United States views the high north as a strategic asset rather than a distant frontier. Rare earth minerals are especially important for the future of American manufacturing. These materials are used in batteries, electric vehicles, wind turbines, advanced electronics, and other systems that modern industries rely on. As the United States accelerates its transition toward cleaner technology, demand for these minerals grows even faster, making reliable access one of the most important factors for industrial planning. The challenge is that the United States relies heavily on foreign suppliers for these materials, with China controlling a large share of global production and processing. This dependence creates risk, since any fluctuation in availability or pricing can influence the cost of finished goods across multiple sectors. A simple example shows how quickly the impact spreads through the economy. When rare earth prices rise, the cost of producing electric vehicle motors increases, and even a small rise can raise the final price of the vehicle itself. Changes like this may seem minor at first, but they compound as manufacturers adjust their production plans and retailers adjust their pricing. Over time, these shifts affect consumer behavior, and the wider market begins to feel the pressure in both demand and supply. This dynamic explains why the United States places strategic importance on Greenland and the broader Arctic zone. If the region becomes more accessible and resource development becomes feasible, it could offer a realistic path to reducing reliance on foreign suppliers and strengthening domestic supply chain security. For industries that depend on stable access to minerals and energy, the Arctic represents one of the few long-term alternatives to existing sources, especially as demand continues to rise. This is why interest in the region grows each year as ice conditions change and exploration becomes more technically possible. But the United States is not the only country with an interest in these resources. Russia and China have steadily expanded their cooperation across the Arctic, focusing on energy development, shipping access, and long-term control over emerging routes. For both countries, the region offers a rare combination of strategic position and economic opportunity, which is why their joint activity has increased each year as conditions in the high north continue to change. Russia views the Arctic as a critical part of its long-term energy strategy, and many of its major projects depend on access to offshore gas and shipping lanes along its northern coast. China sees the region as a gateway to future trade routes and a potential source of minerals that support its industrial growth. When these interests align, cooperation becomes a powerful tool, and their combined capabilities make it easier to invest in infrastructure and exploration that would be difficult to pursue alone. For the United States, this cooperation creates a new layer of pressure. If Russia and China strengthen their presence in the region, the United States must commit more resources to protect its own strategic interests. This means more spending on surveillance, more investment in military readiness, and more attention to supply chain security, since access to energy and minerals can shift the balance of economic power. The financial impact is immediate and long-term. Each step the United States takes to maintain parity in the Arctic adds to federal costs, and these commitments do not disappear with short-term policy changes. Instead, They accumulate and shape how resources are allocated across defense, energy, and infrastructure budgets. This is why Russia-China cooperation in the Arctic is viewed as more than a regional development. It signals a future in which the United States must prepare for sustained competition in a zone that directly influences energy markets and industrial supply chains. This means the Arctic race is becoming not just a global contest, but an economic event that reaches into the daily life of American households. The changes unfolding in the Arctic are no longer limited to strategy or industry. They are shaping the price of energy, the cost of transportation, and the affordability of the products that households rely on every day. When competition in the region intensifies, the first impact often appears in energy markets, because expectations about natural gas and oil supply influence what Americans pay to heat their homes, fuel their cars, and power their daily routines. Any uncertainty around future access or production raises volatility, and even small changes in global supply can create noticeable shifts in household expenses. The second impact reaches manufacturing. Electric vehicles, batteries, and semiconductor production all rely on minerals that are becoming more contested as global demand increases. When the cost of these materials rises, manufacturers face higher production expenses that move through the supply chain. Even a small shift in mineral prices can raise the cost of finished products, shaping how households decide what they can afford. Logistics pressure adds another layer. As the United States recalibrates its supply routes and prepares for a future where other nations may control seasonal access to the Arctic, shipping costs become a determining factor in the price of imported goods. When freight becomes more expensive or less predictable, retailers adjust their pricing, and consumers feel the effects through everyday items on store shelves. There is also the growing question of national spending. Maintaining strategic balance in the Arctic requires long-term investment in defense, infrastructure, and supply chain security. These commitments influence federal budgets, and over time, they shape the economic environment that households must navigate. Higher national costs can translate into higher taxes, reduced spending in other areas, or shifts in public investment that affect communities across the country. All of these forces connect back to consumers. Energy bills, transportation costs, product prices, and long-term financial stability are shaped by how the United States positions itself in the Arctic. As a result, the region has moved from being a distant frontier to becoming a meaningful part of the conversation about American living costs. So the Arctic power race is becoming not only a competition over resources and influence, but also a new front that reshapes the cost structure of everyday life in the United States.